Welcome to this journey through one of the most chilling betrayals of trust in American criminal history. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will disturb you in a way few other accounts can. Not through senseless violence, but through the calculated, methodical destruction of those who showed kindness to a stranger. We're about to delve into a mystery that haunted Cincinnati's German community in the 1930s, where a seemingly devoted caregiver defied all expectations of human decency and left a legacy so dark that newspapers called her home a murder factory. This is the story of how trust became a weapon, how care became cruelty, and how the most vulnerable among us fell victim to someone they invited into their homes, into their lives, into their final days on earth. It was the year 1932. The Great Depression was strangling America in its iron grip. Bread lines stretched around city blocks. Banks had collapsed like dominoes. Families who had once been comfortable now found themselves desperate, clinging to whatever work they could find. In cities across the nation, the elderly faced a particularly cruel fate. Their savings evaporated, their children unable to help, their futures uncertain. In Cincinnati, Ohio, the German immigrant community had always taken care of its own. Germans had been settling in the Queen City since the 1800s, building breweries, establishing businesses, creating neighborhoods where the German language still echoed through streets, and the old traditions endured. These were proud people, hardworking people, people who believed in community and family above all else. But by 1932, even this tight-knit community was fraying at the edges. Elderly German men who had built their lives in America through decades of labor now found themselves alone. Wives had passed, children had scattered, searching for work in other cities. The nursing homes were overcrowded, and many German immigrants preferred to remain in their own homes, surrounded by familiar things, maintaining what dignity they could in their final years. They needed help, someone to shop for them, to cook their meals, to manage their affairs, someone to ease the burden of aging alone. And into this need stepped a woman who would become known as one of Cincinnati's most notorious killers. A woman who would prey upon the elderly with such systematic cruelty that her case would shock the nation. A woman who transformed the sacred act of caregiving into something monstrous. Her name was Anna Marie Hahn. But before we understand the killer, we must understand the world that created her, and the world she would shatter. The story begins not with death, but with arrival, with immigration, with the promise of America, with dreams that would curdle into nightmares darker than anyone could imagine. This is a story about trust, about vulnerability, about the terrible things that can happen when someone exploits the very best instincts of human nature, our desire to help, our willingness to trust, our hope that kindness will be returned with kindness. That hope would prove fatal. Anna Marie Filser was born on July 7, 1906, in a small village in Bavaria, Germany. She entered the world in the dying years of the German Empire, in a countryside that would soon be torn apart by the First World War. Little is known about her early childhood, but the stories she would later tell painted a picture of a young woman who always wanted more. She claimed to have had an affair with a Viennese physician as a teenager, a story that, like so many of her tales, could never be verified. What is certain is that by her early 20s, Anna Marie had developed a taste for a life beyond what rural Bavaria could offer. She was attractive in a plain sort of way, with sharp features and eyes that some would later describe as calculating, though at the time they seemed merely observant. She had learned the art of presentation, how to appear respectable, how to speak with deference while never quite submitting. It was a skill that would serve her well. In 1929, as the world economy collapsed and Germany sank into chaos, Anna Marie made a decision that would alter the course of dozens of lives. She would go to America. She would find prosperity. She would reinvent herself. She arrived in Cincinnati with her young son, Oscar, in tow. Her husband, a man named Philip Hahn, whom she had married in Germany, would join her later, though their relationship was already fracturing. Anna Marie had grand ambitions, and Philip was merely an obstacle. Cincinnati's German community welcomed her, as they welcomed so many immigrants. She found work, first in small jobs, then gradually inserting herself into the lives of elderly German men who needed assistance. She was good at this work, charming, attentive. She would visit the homes of these lonely men and assess their situations with a practiced eye, noting their savings, their property, their isolation. She would offer her services as a live-in attendant, someone to cook and clean and manage their affairs. And they, grateful for companionship, for someone who spoke their native tongue, for relief from the grinding loneliness of old age, would accept. Ernest Koch was 72 years old when Anna Marie Hahn entered his life in 1933. He lived alone in a modest house on Race Street, his wife dead for several years, his children grown and distant. He had worked his entire life, saved his money, lived frugally. He had a small bank account, nothing substantial by Depression standards, but enough to live out his final years in relative comfort. Anna Marie offered to help him. She could shop for him, she said, cook his favorite German dishes, keep his house clean. All she asked was a small room and modest payment. Ernest Koch, lonely and tired, agreed. For several weeks, everything seemed normal. Anna Marie cooked hearty meals. She kept the house spotless. She was deferential, respectful, constantly attentive to his needs. Ernest told neighbors that he was grateful for her help, that she was like a daughter to him. Then he fell ill. It started with stomach cramps, nausea, a general weakness that he attributed to his age, to the natural decline of a body nearing the end of its journey. Anna Marie fussed over him, bringing him soup, encouraging him to eat, expressing concern to neighbors about his failing health. The symptoms intensified: violent vomiting, diarrhea, burning sensations in his throat and stomach. The pain was excruciating, but doctors of that era, especially during the Depression when medical care was expensive, often diagnosed such symptoms as gastric fever or food poisoning, common ailments that sometimes proved fatal in the elderly. Ernest Koch died on May 28, 1933. Anna Marie wept at his funeral. She told mourners how much she cared for the old man, how she wished she could have done more. Some of the German community women patted her hand and told her she had been a blessing in his final days. What they didn't know was that in the days following Ernest's death, Anna Marie had helped herself to his modest savings. She had forged his signature on checks. She had taken jewelry, small items of value. She had systematically looted what little he had accumulated over a lifetime of work. And she had gotten away with it. The pattern was established. Over the next 4 years, Anna Marie Hahn refined her method. She would target elderly German men, always alone, always with at least modest savings. She would present herself as a respectable widow, a hard-working immigrant just trying to survive the Depression. She would gain their trust slowly, methodically, never rushing. Once established in a household, she would begin the process of extraction. First, she would convince them to sign over power of attorney, to let her manage their finances. She told them it was for their own good, that they were too old to handle such matters, that she would make sure everything was properly managed. Then would come the checks, small at first for groceries, for household expenses, amounts that wouldn't raise suspicion. But gradually, the amounts would increase. Money would be transferred to accounts Anna Marie controlled. And then, once the financial groundwork was laid, would come the poison. Arsenic was easy to obtain in the 1930s. It was sold openly as rat poison, as weed killer, as an ingredient in certain medications. No one questioned a housekeeper purchasing such items. Rodents were a constant problem in Depression-era homes. Anna Marie would administer it slowly, mixing it into food and drink. The symptoms mimicked dozens of natural ailments: stomach problems, weakness, nausea. Doctors rarely suspected poisoning. Why would they? These were elderly men with various health problems. Their deaths, while sad, seemed natural. But Anna Marie's true genius, if such an evil thing can be called genius, was in her persona. She didn't just kill and move on. She maintained relationships with the community. She attended funerals and wept. She spoke of her patients with apparent affection. She cultivated an image of a devoted caregiver, someone who sacrificed to help others. The German community saw her as an asset, a woman willing to do the difficult work of caring for their elderly. They recommended her to others. They praised her dedication. They had no idea they were feeding her more victims. Jacob Wagner, 78 years old, died after 3 months in Anna Marie's care. George Gies Elman, 67, dead within weeks of hiring her. George Obendorfer, 72, would become the victim that finally exposed her. Each death followed the same pattern. Each time, Anna Marie walked away with their money, their possessions, their life savings. Each time, the German community mourned another loss, never connecting the dots, never seeing the pattern. Death, after all, was common in those days. The elderly died. It was natural. It was expected. Only it wasn't natural at all. What made Anna Marie Hahn's case particularly disturbing was the life she was building with her victims' money. She didn't just steal to survive. She stole to thrive, to indulge, to live the glamorous life she had always wanted. She divorced Philip Hahn, though she kept his surname. It was useful in the German community. She began dressing in expensive clothes, visiting nightclubs, gambling at racetracks. She took trips, staying in nice hotels, spending money freely. Her neighbors in the building where she lived with her son Oscar noticed the discrepancy. How could a poor widow working as a caregiver afford such luxuries? Anna Marie had explanations ready: gifts from grateful clients, small inheritances, lucky gambling wins. She was charming enough, confident enough, that most people accepted her explanations without question. But there were whispers. There always are. Some members of the German community began to notice how many of Anna Marie's clients seemed to die. Some wondered about the wills and financial documents that seemed to benefit her. Some thought it odd that a woman who claimed to be struggling would appear at the racetrack wearing a new dress and expensive jewelry. But whispers are not evidence, suspicions are not proof, and Anna Marie continued her deadly work. The summer of 1937 was brutally hot in Cincinnati. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer above asphalt, that turned small apartments into ovens, that drove people to seek relief anywhere they could find it. Anna Marie Hahn decided to take a vacation. She had recently been caring for George Obendorfer, a 72-year-old retired German immigrant who lived alone and had accumulated a comfortable nest egg through decades of frugal living. Following her established pattern, Anna Marie had convinced George to let her manage his finances. Over several weeks, she had systematically transferred his money to her own accounts. Now, with George showing signs of the illness that preceded death in her other victims, Anna Marie decided to take her son Oscar on a trip. Colorado, she thought, cool mountain air, a vacation funded by George Obendorfer's life savings. There was just one problem. George Obendorfer was still alive, and unlike some of her previous victims, George had relatives who actually checked on him. His nephew had been visiting regularly, bringing food, making sure his uncle was comfortable. He noticed that George seemed unwell, violently ill, in fact, with the same mysterious stomach ailment that had plagued Anna Marie's other clients. On July 31st, 1937, George Obendorfer died. His nephew, suspicious of how quickly his uncle's money had disappeared and how convenient Anna Marie's absence was, contacted the authorities. He demanded an autopsy. This simple act, this refusal to let his uncle's death pass without question, would unravel everything. Dr. Frank Kelly, the coroner who performed George Obendorfer's autopsy, was immediately suspicious. The condition of the body, the severity of the damage to the internal organs, the burning throughout the digestive tract, none of it matched a natural death. He ordered toxicology tests, something that was still relatively rare in 1937, especially for someone of George's age. The results came back within days: arsenic, massive quantities of it, enough to kill several men. George Obendorfer had been murdered. Detective Chief Jacob Reisner of the Cincinnati Police Department took charge of the investigation. He was a methodical man, patient, with a reputation for solving complex cases. But even he was unprepared for what he would discover. Once Anna Marie Hahn was identified as the primary suspect, Detective Reisner began tracing her history through Cincinnati's German community. He spoke with families of her previous clients. He examined death certificates. He reviewed financial records. What emerged was a pattern so clear, so consistent, so horrifying that it seemed almost impossible that no one had noticed it before. Every elderly German man who had hired Anna Marie Hahn as a caregiver had died within months. Every single one had mysteriously signed over their finances to her shortly before their deaths. Every death had been attributed to natural causes: gastric fever, stomach problems, general decline symptoms that perfectly matched arsenic poisoning. Reisner immediately issued orders for Anna Marie's arrest. But she was already in Colorado, enjoying her vacation, spending George Obendorfer's money on hotels and restaurants and tourist attractions. Police telegraphed ahead to Colorado authorities. On the morning of August 8, 1937, Anna Marie Hahn was arrested in her hotel room in Denver. She was brought back to Cincinnati in handcuffs, facing murder charges that would shock the nation. What followed was one of the most extensive forensic investigations of the era. With George Obendorfer's body providing proof of arsenic poisoning, authorities obtained court orders to exhume the bodies of Anna Marie's previous clients. One by one, coffins were pulled from the earth. One by one, corpses that had been buried with full funeral rites, mourned by the German community, laid to rest with prayers and flowers, were brought into the harsh light of investigation. The findings were damning. Jacob Wagner's body contained lethal levels of arsenic. George Geese Elman's corpse, despite months in the ground, still showed clear evidence of poisoning. Albert Palmer, another of her clients, had arsenic permeating his remains. In total, 5 bodies were exhumed. Each contained arsenic. Each death, initially attributed to natural causes, was revealed to be murder. But the investigation uncovered something even more disturbing. Not all of Anna Marie's victims had been poisoned with the same substance. While arsenic was her primary weapon, she had also used other poisons, croton oil in some cases, a brutal substance that caused excruciating pain and a horrible death. George Geese Elman, investigators discovered, had been given croton oil. The autopsy revealed the damage it had caused, the burning throughout his digestive system, the evidence of intense suffering. According to medical texts of the era, croton oil caused an intense burning pain in mouth, throat, and abdomen, excessive salivation, vomiting and diarrhea with tenseness and passage of blood. George G. Ellman had died in agony, and Anna Marie Hahn had watched, probably ensuring he took enough to be fatal, probably checking on him regularly to monitor his decline. This wasn't just killing for profit. This was torture. As Detective Reisner dug deeper, the full scope of Anna Marie's crimes became apparent. Her own husband, Philip Hahn, came forward with a crucial piece of evidence: a half-ounce bottle of croton oil he had confiscated from her when they were still living together. He had suspected she was using it for nefarious purposes, though he claimed he never imagined the extent of her crimes. Investigators searched Anna Marie's apartment and made a discovery that would become a centerpiece of the trial. They found enough poison to, as one newspaper would later report, kill half of Cincinnati. There were bottles of arsenic purchased from multiple pharmacies. There were various other toxic substances. There were notes, calculations, amounts that suggested careful planning and methodical execution. Anna Marie Hahn wasn't just an opportunistic killer who had stumbled into murder. She was organized, systematic, calculating. She kept records. She planned her purchases to avoid suspicion, buying small amounts from different pharmacies, using different names. She had developed a system that had worked for years. The question haunting investigators was, how many victims had there really been? The 5 exhumed bodies provided proof of murder, but Anna Marie had worked for dozens of elderly German men over the years. How many of their natural deaths had actually been murder? How many families had mourned, never knowing their loved one had been killed for a few $100s? The true number of Anna Marie Hahn's victims would likely never be known. Prosecutors building the case against Anna Marie discovered a trail of financial crimes that paralleled the murders. She had forged signatures on checks and documents. She had convinced her victims to sign over power of attorney, then immediately began draining their accounts. She had claimed to be purchasing groceries and household items while actually spending the money on herself, on clothes, on gambling, on the lifestyle she craved. Bank records showed transfers that made no sense except as theft. Witnesses came forward describing how they had seen Anna Marie forging signatures, how she had asked them to notarize documents under false pretenses, how she had manipulated elderly men into signing papers they didn't understand. One particularly damning witness was a pharmacist who remembered Anna Marie purchasing large quantities of arsenic. She had claimed she needed it for rats, but the amount she bought was far more than any household would need. The pharmacist, required by law to keep records of poison sales, had documented every purchase. Those records, when combined with the dates of her victims' deaths, created a timeline that was impossible to refute. Purchase arsenic, begin working for elderly victim, victim becomes ill, victim dies, Anna Marie collects money. Purchase more arsenic, move to next victim. The pattern was undeniable. As news of the case spread, Cincinnati erupted in shock and outrage. The German community, in particular, felt betrayed. They had trusted Anna Marie Hahn. They had welcomed her, recommended her, praised her devotion to the elderly. And she had used that trust to commit murder after murder after murder. Newspapers ran sensational headlines: "Murder Factory Discovered in Cincinnati," and "Blonde Borgia Arrested," and "Arsenic, Anna Strikes Again." The case had everything newspapers of the era loved a female killer, which was still relatively rare; elderly victims, which generated sympathy; poison, which seemed both old-fashioned and sinister, and a quantity of victims that suggested a serial killer, though that term wasn't yet in common use. The public's fascination with the case was intense. People lined up outside the courthouse hoping to catch a glimpse of Anna Marie. Reporters followed every development. The trial, when it came, would be one of the most sensational Cincinnati had ever seen. But beneath the sensationalism lay a deeper horror. This woman had systematically targeted the most vulnerable members of society: elderly, lonely, trusting people who had opened their homes to her. She had exploited their kindness, their isolation, their need for help. She had turned caregiving into murder. On November 1, 1937, the trial of Anna Marie Hahn began in Cincinnati's criminal court. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the back, reporters jostling for position. The judge, having anticipated the public interest, had arranged for extra security. This would be, everyone knew, a trial that would capture national attention. Anna Marie Hahn entered the courtroom dressed impeccably. She wore a dark dress, modest jewelry, her hair carefully styled. She understood presentation, understood that her appearance would be scrutinized by newspapers across the country. She needed to look respectable, sympathetic, like someone who could never commit the horrible crimes she was accused of. The charges were read. First, degree murder in the death of George Obendorfer. Though evidence existed for multiple murders, prosecutors had decided to focus on George's case, which had the strongest evidence and the most recent death. Anna Marie pleaded not guilty. Her defense attorney, Joseph Hoodin, faced an almost impossible task. The evidence against his client was overwhelming, but he had a strategy. He would argue that Anna Marie was a victim herself, a woman driven to desperation by poverty, by the crushing weight of the Depression, by the need to provide for her son. It was a strategy that might have worked in a different era, with different evidence. It would not work here. Prosecutor Dudley Miller, out Calt, was a formidable attorney with a reputation for thorough preparation and devastating courtroom presentations. He had spent months building the case against Anna Marie Hahn, and now he would present it with methodical precision. His opening statement laid out the full horror of Anna Marie's crimes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom, what you are about to hear is not the story of a desperate woman driven to extremes by poverty. What you will hear is the calculated, systematic, cold-blooded murder of elderly men who trusted the defendant, who welcomed her into their homes, who believed she would care for them in their final years. He paused, letting the words sink in. Instead, she poisoned them. She watched them die in agony, and then she stole everything they had. Over the next 3 weeks, Outcalt presented a devastating case. Medical experts testified about the arsenic found in George Obendorfer's body. Dr. Frank Kelly, the coroner, described the internal damage, the clear signs of poisoning, the impossibility of these being natural deaths. Pharmacists testified about Anna Marie's poison purchases. They produced records showing she had bought enough arsenic to kill dozens of people. Handwriting experts demonstrated that signatures on checks and financial documents had been forged by Anna Marie. Bank officials showed how money had been systematically transferred from victims' accounts to Anna Marie's control. Most damning of all were the relatives of the victims. George Obendorfer's nephew took the stand and described his uncle's sudden illness, how healthy he had been before Anna Marie's care, how quickly he had declined. The nephew's testimony was emotional but controlled. "My uncle trusted her," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "He thought she was helping him. He died thinking she was a good woman. Throughout the testimony, Anna Marie sat motionless at the defense table. She showed little emotion, though occasionally she would dab at her eyes with a handkerchief, as if weeping. Reporters noted that her tears seemed calculated, timed for maximum effect. Joseph Hooden's defense of Anna Marie Hahn was hampered from the start by the sheer weight of evidence against his client. He called character witnesses who described Anna Marie as a devoted mother, a hardworking woman, someone who had struggled to survive in America during the Depression. He brought Oscar, her teenage son, to testify about what a wonderful mother she had been. Though Oscar's testimony seemed coached, uncertain, and did little to sway the jury, Hooden argued that the arsenic could have entered the bodies through other means: contaminated food, environmental exposure, accidental ingestion. But medical experts demolished these claims. The quantities found in the victims' bodies could only have come from deliberate poisoning. The patterns were too consistent, too methodical to be accidental. Most controversially, Hooden suggested that some of the victims might have been taking arsenic themselves, perhaps as medication, perhaps to ease their suffering in old age. This argument was met with open skepticism by the jury and generated outraged responses from victims' families. The defense's weakest moment came when Hooden was forced to explain Anna Marie's sudden wealth. Where had the money come from for her expensive clothes, her gambling, her vacations? Hooden claimed these were gifts, winnings, small inheritances. But when prosecutors presented evidence showing exactly how much money had been stolen from each victim and how it correlated with Anna Marie's spending, the defense collapsed. Perhaps sensing that a traditional defense was hopeless, Hooden made a dramatic shift in strategy midway through the trial. He began to suggest that Anna Marie might be mentally ill, that no sane woman could commit such crimes, that she deserved psychiatric evaluation rather than punishment. This argument might have had more weight if Anna Marie herself hadn't appeared so composed, so calculating, so clearly aware of her actions throughout the trial. On November 20th, 1937, Anna Marie Hahn made the decision to testify in her own defense. It was a calculated risk. She was articulate and composed, and Hooden believed that if jurors heard her story directly, they might be sympathetic. But it also meant subjecting her to Outcult's cross-examination, and the prosecutor had been waiting for this opportunity. Anna Marie's direct testimony, guided by Hooden, presented her as a victim of circumstance. She described her difficult childhood in Germany, her struggles as an immigrant, her desperate attempts to survive the Depression while caring for her son. She claimed that her work with elderly German men had been motivated by genuine compassion, by a desire to help her community. She admitted to taking money from some of her clients, but claimed they had given it to her willingly, as payment for her services or as gifts in recognition of her devotion. She denied poisoning anyone. She wept as she described her arrest, her separation from Oscar, the horror of being accused of such terrible crimes. It was a compelling performance. Some observers in the courtroom seemed moved by her testimony. Then came Outcult's cross-examination. The prosecutor was relentless. He walked Anna Marie through each victim's death, forcing her to explain the coincidences, how each man had signed over his finances shortly before dying, how each death had occurred when Anna Marie was caring for them, how she had benefited financially from every death. Mrs. Hahn. Outcult said, his voice sharp, "Is it your testimony that 5 different elderly men, all in your care, all of whom signed over their money to you, all happened to die of natural causes within weeks of meeting you?" Anna Marie tried to maintain her composure. "They were old. They were sick. I tried to help them. And you just happened to purchase large quantities of arsenic during this same period. For rats. I told you, for rats. Rats that somehow never consumed the poison, but 5 men in your care did. The questioning went on for hours. Outcalt methodically dismantled every explanation, every excuse, every claim of innocence. He forced Anna Marie to account for her spending the clothes, the gambling, the vacations. He showed the jury bank records proving that the money came directly from her victims. Most devastating was when Outcalt confronted her with the croton oil bottle her ex-husband had provided. "Why did you have croton oil, Mrs. Hahn? This isn't rat poison. This is a substance that causes excruciating pain. Why would you have this?" Anna Marie faltered. Her carefully constructed persona cracked. She had no good answer, and the jury saw it. By the time Outcalt finished, Anna Marie's credibility was destroyed. Whatever sympathy her initial testimony had generated had evaporated under the harsh light of cross-examination. The trial lasted 4 weeks, but the jury deliberated for less than a day. On November 27, 1937, they returned with their verdict. Guilty of murder in the first degree, the courtroom erupted. Anna Marie Hahn, who had maintained her composure throughout most of the trial, finally broke down. She sobbed openly as the verdict was read, crying out in German, proclaiming her innocence. But the jury had seen through her performance. They had heard the evidence, seen the timeline, understood the pattern. Anna Marie Hahn had systematically murdered elderly men for profit, and they were not going to let her escape justice. The sentencing phase was brief. Under Ohio law, first-degree murder carried a mandatory death sentence. Judge Charles S. Bell had no discretion. Anna Marie Hahn, he intoned, "You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of the crime of first-degree murder. This court sentences you to death by electrocution. May God have mercy on your soul." Anna Marie continued to sob and protest as she was led from the courtroom. She would appeal, she said. She would prove her innocence. This was a mistake, a terrible injustice. But her appeals would go nowhere. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear, the verdict too just. Anna Marie Hahn spent 13 months on death row in the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus. During that time, she gave numerous interviews to newspapers, each time proclaiming her innocence, each time offering new explanations for the evidence against her. She claimed she was being persecuted because she was a German immigrant. She said the victims had actually been poisoned by their own relatives. She suggested that the police had framed her. None of her claims held up under scrutiny. Her appeals were systematically denied. The Ohio Supreme Court reviewed the case and found no errors in the trial. The evidence was overwhelming, the verdict just, the sentence appropriate. As the date of her execution approached, Anna Marie's demeanor changed. The confident, composed woman who had testified at her trial gave way to someone increasingly desperate and fearful. She wrote letters to officials begging for clemency. She claimed she had found religion and deserved a chance to redeem herself. On December 6, 1938, her final appeal was denied. She would die the next day. The execution was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the evening. In a highly unusual move, Anna Marie was allowed to host a small gathering in her cell that afternoon, a party, as some newspapers called it, though the mood was anything but festive. A few reporters were allowed to attend, and they described a woman who seemed disconnected from reality, laughing inappropriately, making small talk as if this were any other social occasion. It was a performance, one final attempt to control the narrative, to maintain some semblance of dignity. As the appointed hour approached, Anna Marie's composure shattered completely. She was led from her cell toward the death chamber, and the reality of what was about to happen finally overwhelmed her. She began screaming, crying out in German and English, begging for mercy, proclaiming her innocence, calling for her son. "No, no, no," she shrieked as guards tried to lead her forward. "Mr. Woodward, Mr. Woodward, don't do this to me." She was addressing Warden Arthur Woodward, pleading with him as if he had the power to stop what was coming. He did not. The prison chaplain, Reverend Frederick McGowan, walked beside her, holding her hand, trying to provide what comfort he could. She clung to him like a lifeline, but even his presence couldn't calm her terror. The death chamber door opened. Inside, the electric chair waited. Ohio's method of execution was quick but brutal, 350 volts of electricity surging through the body, stopping the heart, ending life in moments. Anna Marie Hahn was strapped into the chair, still crying, still protesting. The hood was placed over her face. At 8:13 p.m., on December 7, 1938, the switch was thrown. Anna Marie Hahn became the first woman executed in Ohio's history. She was 32 years old. In the weeks and months following Anna Marie Hahn's execution, Cincinnati's German community struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The victims Ernest Koch, Jacob Wagner, George Gies, Elman, Albert Palmer, George Obendorfer, and potentially dozens more whose deaths were never fully investigated, had been ordinary men. They weren't wealthy, they weren't famous. They were simply elderly immigrants who had worked hard their entire lives and found themselves alone and vulnerable in their final years. They had trusted Anna Marie Hahn. They had welcomed her into their homes. They had believed she would care for them. And she had killed them for a few $100s each. Memorial services were held throughout Cincinnati's German neighborhoods. Families who had lost loved ones years earlier, deaths they had accepted as natural, now had to confront the horrifying possibility that their relatives had been murdered. Some chose to believe their loved ones had truly died of natural causes. Others demanded exhumations, wanting certainty, wanting justice, even if it came too late. The psychological toll on the community was immense. Trust, once shattered, is difficult to rebuild. For years afterward, elderly German immigrants in Cincinnati were reluctant to hire help, afraid that any stranger might be another Anna Marie Hahn. Anna Marie Hahn's case had significant implications for American criminal justice. She was the first woman executed in Ohio, breaking a barrier that reflected changing attitudes about female criminals. Throughout history, women had often received lighter sentences than men for the same crimes, the justice system operating under the assumption that women were inherently less dangerous, less capable of true evil. Anna Marie Hahn shattered that assumption. Her case demonstrated that women could be just as calculating, just as ruthless, just as deadly as male killers. The systematic nature of her crimes, the careful planning, the cold manipulation, these weren't the actions of someone driven to a moment of passion or desperation. This was organized, methodical serial killing. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of elderly populations, particularly immigrants who maintained strong cultural ties and often preferred to remain within their own communities. Anna Marie had exploited these cultural preferences, knowing that German immigrants would feel more comfortable with a German-speaking caregiver, that they would be less likely to report financial irregularities, that their deaths would be attributed to age rather than investigated thoroughly. In the years following her execution, Ohio and other states began implementing stricter regulations around caregivers for the elderly. Background checks became more common. Financial oversight increased. The case had exposed a dark reality. Those we trust to care for our most vulnerable can, in some cases, be their greatest threat. Despite the thoroughness of the investigation and trial, many questions about Anna Marie Hahn's crimes remain unanswered. How many people did she actually kill? 5 deaths were confirmed through exhumations and evidence presented at trial. But Anna Marie had worked for dozens of elderly German men over a 4-year period. How many of their deaths, attributed at the time to natural causes, were actually murder? Detective Reisner believed the true number could be as high as 15 or even 20. But without exhuming every body, an impossibility both practically and ethically, the full extent of her crimes would never be known. Another haunting question: why did she do it? Money, certainly, but Anna Marie wasn't starving. She wasn't desperate in the way many Depression-era Americans were desperate. She had options, opportunities. She could have worked legitimate jobs. Instead, she chose to kill. Some psychologists who later studied the case suggested she might have been a psychopath, someone lacking empathy, viewing other people as objects to be used rather than human beings deserving of compassion. Others pointed to her upbringing in post-war Germany, suggesting that early trauma might have damaged her ability to connect emotionally with others. But these are just theories. Anna Marie herself never provided a satisfactory explanation. She maintained her innocence until the end, never confessing, never explaining, never showing genuine remorse for her victims. Perhaps the most disturbing question is one that extends beyond Anna Marie herself. How did she get away with it for so long? The pattern was clear in retrospect. Every elderly man she cared for died. Every death benefited her financially. Yet for 4 years, no one connected the dots. No one investigated. No one suspected. Part of the answer lies in the era. Medical knowledge about poisoning was less sophisticated. Autopsies were expensive and rarely performed on elderly people who seemed to die of natural causes. Record keeping was less centralized, making pattern recognition more difficult. But there's a darker truth as well. Anna Marie succeeded because she preyed on people society didn't value enough to protect. Elderly immigrants, men without close family, people who were isolated, vulnerable, easy to exploit. Their deaths didn't raise alarms because, on some level, society expected them to die. They were old. They were sick. Their passing was sad but unsurprising. Anna Marie Hahn understood this. She exploited not just individual vulnerabilities, but societal blind spots. The case of Anna Marie Hahn feels like something from a distant era, a reminder of a time when poison was a common weapon and elderly immigrants were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. But similar cases continue to emerge. In 2012, a nurse named Elizabeth Wetlaufer in Ontario, Canada, was convicted of killing 8 elderly patients in nursing homes over a 9-year period. Like Anna Marie, she had access, opportunity, and the trust of people who couldn't defend themselves. In 2016, a caregiver in Japan named Ayano Kani was arrested for poisoning multiple elderly patients in her care, driven by the same combination of greed and callousness that motivated Anna Marie. The specific details change: the poisons, the settings, the nationalities, but the core dynamic remains the same. Someone in a position of trust, caring for vulnerable people, exploiting that trust for personal gain. We want to believe that such things can't happen anymore, that our systems are too sophisticated, our oversight too thorough. But the truth is that wherever there are vulnerable people and those who care for them, there exists the possibility of exploitation. The question is whether we're willing to invest in the kind of oversight, the kind of social support, the kind of community vigilance necessary to prevent it. Anna Marie Hahn's execution raised questions about capital punishment that remain relevant today. Some argued that she deserved death, that someone who had killed so systematically, so callously, had forfeited her right to live. The families of her victims, many of them, wanted to see justice served in the most final way possible. Others pointed out that executing Anna Marie wouldn't bring her victims back, wouldn't undo the suffering she had caused. They argued that life imprisonment would have served justice while avoiding the state-sanctioned taking of life. Her gender complicated the debate. Was she being executed because her crimes were so heinous, or was there an element of wanting to make an example of a woman who had violated societal expectations in such a dramatic way? Would a man with similar crimes have been treated the same way? Or was Anna Marie subject to a different standard precisely because female serial killers were so rare? These questions don't have easy answers. Justice is always complex, always influenced by cultural contexts and historical moments. What is clear is that Anna Marie Hahn was executed not just for killing George Obendorfer, the specific crime for which she was convicted, but for the pattern of death she left in her wake, for systematic exploitation of trust, for proving that caregiving could be transformed into something monstrous. On that December night in 1938, as Anna Marie Hahn was led to the electric chair, still protesting her innocence, still crying out in terror, there must have been a moment of reckoning, a moment when the performance ended, when the careful facade she had maintained for years crumbled completely, when she faced the consequences of her actions with no escape, no explanation that could save her. Did she think of her victims in that moment? Did she remember Ernest Koch, 70, 2 years old, dying in agony from the poison she had fed him? Did she recall Jacob Wagner, trusting her until the end? Did George Obendorfer's face haunt her as the guards strapped her into the chair? Or did she think only of herself, of the injustice she believed she was suffering, of the life she had wanted and would never have? We cannot know. Anna Marie Hahn took those thoughts with her into death. What we do know is that her victims, ordinary people, hardworking immigrants, elderly men who had simply wanted help and companionship in their final years, deserved better. They deserved care, not murder. They deserved dignity, not exploitation. They deserved to die surrounded by genuine compassion, not by someone calculating how much money she could steal from their corpses. Anna Marie Hahn stole their deaths from them. She stole their peace. She stole their dignity, and for that she paid the ultimate price. The story of Anna Marie Hahn remains a disturbing reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious signs. It can wear a pleasant face, speak in a kind voice, present itself as help when it is actually harm. The elderly men she killed weren't random victims. They were specifically chosen, carefully targeted because they were vulnerable and isolated. Anna Marie saw their loneliness and exploited it. She saw their trust and betrayed it. She saw their need for help and transformed it into opportunity for murder. This is perhaps the most chilling aspect of her crimes, the calculated nature of them, the way she systematically identified and exploited the most vulnerable members of her community. But questions remain, shadows that linger even 8 decades after her execution. How many people did she truly kill? Were there victims in other cities before Cincinnati whose deaths were never connected to her? Did she have accomplices, people who helped her, who knew what she was doing and said nothing? The answers died with her on that December night in 1938. To this day, historians occasionally discover references to unexplained deaths in German immigrant communities during the Depression era. Was Anna Marie Hahn responsible for some of these? We will likely never know. And on quiet evenings in Cincinnati's German neighborhoods, in the old buildings that still stand from that era, some say you can still feel the presence of those who died trusting the wrong person. The house where Ernest Koch lived is still there, repurposed now but retaining its original structure. Some residents report an unsettling presence, a sense of sadness that pervades certain rooms. The cemetery where many of Anna Marie's victims are buried sees occasional visitors, descendants of the victims, true crime enthusiasts, people drawn to the tragic history. They leave flowers on graves that went decades without flowers, acknowledging victims that history nearly forgot. Anna Marie Hahn's own grave is unmarked. Ohio doesn't maintain markers for executed criminals. She lies in an anonymous plot, her name forgotten by the land she adopted, remembered only through the crimes that defined her. It is, perhaps, the justice she earned, to be erased, to be forgotten, to exist only as a cautionary tale about the darkest capabilities of human nature. If this journey through one of America's most disturbing serial murder cases has moved you, if you find yourself contemplating the nature of trust and betrayal, the vulnerability of the elderly, terrible things that can happen when we fail to protect our most defenseless community members, then consider subscribing to this channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time, crimes that shocked communities, cases that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and society. These aren't just tales of murder and mystery. They're examinations of what we were, what we are, and what we might become if we forget the lessons of history. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own thoughts on how we protect the vulnerable in our communities today. What lessons from Anna Marie Hahn's case remain relevant? How do we balance trust with caution? How do we ensure that those who care for our elderly family members are worthy of that profound responsibility? Until next time, remember that the past is never truly past. Its echoes reach into our present, its lessons inform our future, and its darkest moments serve as warnings we ignore at our peril. This has been the Untold Hour,